Okay, welcome back, everybody. The next item on our agenda is to consider the climate change standard. And if I could just start off with some background to this, one of the key aims of the If I could just start with some background to this standard, one of the key aims of the revision of this climate standard was to broaden the impacts that we are covering, but also to increase the alignment of our disclosures with the globally accepted greenhouse gas protocol emissions disclosures. Previously, we had also considered ISO standards, and this revision brings our disclosures in line with the greenhouse gas protocol. In doing that, we ensure interoperability with the global IFRS S2 standard and other jurisdictional approaches. And as a result of our efforts in revising this standard aligned with the greenhouse gas protocol, both GRI 102, which we're looking at now, and the IFRS S2 standard are referring to the greenhouse gas protocol. And that means that we can state that GRI 102 and IFRS S2 for emissions reporting are very well aligned. And due to the different and complementary focus of GRI 102, assuming we approve it now, and IFRS S2, there are distinctive advantages in organizations using both sets of standards. So GRI 102 will focuses on the most significant impacts of organizations' climate change efforts on the economy, the environment, and people, whereas IFRS S2 focuses on risks and opportunities that arise from climate change and the impacts of the organization. So in that sense, these standards are complementary and will give organizations an excellent basis to report thoroughly on climate change and get a good understanding of their impacts on climate change and the risks that arise from it. So acknowledging the importance of interoperability between the GRI standards and the IFRS S standards for a seamless global reporting system, and with the explicit aim to avoid unnecessary complexity for report preparers worldwide, I want to ask our technical team, our standards division, to encourage their fruitful engagement with the IFRS technical teams, which we've heard very good reports on how those discussions go, and to continue their interoperability work and to finalize a narrative on interoperability between these two standards for early May, which would be around the time of the launch of this standard. And so the aim of this publication, building on the one that we did with our previous standard, GRI 305 on emissions and IFRS S2, is to explain and showcase to the users of both GRI 102 and IFRS S2 in more detail how we have now increased the alignment of the standards and the extent of the complementarity and the breadth of coverage across the two standards of impacts, risks, and opportunities related to climate change. And this deadline of early May for these technical team discussions allows us to issue the publication together with the launch of the GRI climate change standard, GRI 102, and it will prepare us for joint appearances with colleagues from the IFRS Foundation and at major climate change related events and beyond to discuss how the two standards together provide users of climate change information with the information that they need. I'd also like to propose that we are approving GRI 102 today, noting the recent discussion with the ISSB to look at amendments to S2. Our understanding is that they are going to open up S2 and consider some amendments there, and that process would allow even further possibilities for alignment of data points between the respective standards beyond what we've already achieved in this revision to GRI 305. And so all of this is moving in the right direction, I think, for a greater overlap of the common disclosures on emissions and an ability to explain to users and stakeholders and reporters how the two sets of standards fit together. And with that introduction, I'd like to hand over to Margarita. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol, and good morning, everyone. Today, these are the scheduled approvals, as Carol just mentioned. So the approval of the climate change and energy standards and the withdrawal of the disclosures that have been revised and updated as part of the scope of this project, and they are now included within these new standards. I will just start with a brief summary for the benefit of the new members, but also for the audience on what was the objective of this project. So the objective was to revise and update the GHG emissions related disclosure, as well as the energy related disclosures and the GRI 201 economic performance standards disclosure number 2. And of course, the objective with the revision and update was also to align with the latest authoritative instruments based on science in the field of climate change and energy, like the IPCC and the International Energy Agency, but also to incorporate new issues within these standards that were not currently present, that goes beyond GHG emissions and energy accounting, and include new expectations from stakeholders, like how companies or organizations develop transition and adaptation strategies, and a lot of other items that I'll be speaking about in a second. This slide is just to give you an overview of the landscape that we operating in and we are still operating within for the development of these two standards. Of course, we got a lot of inputs from the great work of all of those initiatives and standards and frameworks. As was mentioned a moment ago, the aim of this revision was also to stay aligned with the greenhouse gas protocol. And we can say that the disclosures are aligned with the current greenhouse gas protocol standards, but also thanks to the fact that the greenhouse gas protocol is part of the technical committee, was part of the technical committee for this project, this also allow us to get some insight of the upcoming revision they just started. And of course, like this project aim was also to keep close contact with the major initiatives, frameworks, and standard setters in the field, including IFRS, ISSB, SBTI, CDP, ILO, ISO, etc. This is an overview of the technical committee composition that helped in the development of the content development. So it's a global multi-stakeholder group of experts. They made decision on a consensus form. And of course, that was created and put together according to the GRI due process protocol. And as you can see, basically the representation from different constituencies is balanced, and also the representation across different regions. But especially because we wanted to ensure that representation across regions was ensured, we'd also put together, in addition to the technical committee, also a very good pool of experts that we call peer reviewers group. And of course, we, as I explained to this group in the past, we put extra efforts to ensure representation also by regions that are unfortunately most affected by climate change, and in some fora they lack representation. And of course, like most of the initiatives I just mentioned before, like they are considered authoritative in the field on subfield in relation to climate change and energy, were part of the peer reviewer process. On top of the technical committee, they provided consistent feedback across the whole duration of the project. This is an overview, a high-level overview of the timeline. So the public commenting period ended early last year, and we spent most of last year in analyzing the very good feedback that we received and very technical feedback we received, and also in revising the content accordingly, having a lot of discussion with the technical committee and the peer reviewers throughout the process. And then toward the end of last year, we ran the technical review of our standards, and following that, the editorial review early this year. And so we are very excited to be here today to present the final standards for the approval. And provided we will get the approval from you today, then the next steps will be presenting the standards to the Due Process Oversight Committee. A meeting will be scheduled early in April, and following also that part of the due process protocol. And after that, if everything goes well and we get both approvals, then we move forward with the rollout and the implementation program. So we put together a very dense set of activities that I'm gonna discuss and show, not discuss, but explain to you at the end. This is a summary and overview of the content of the GRI climate change standard. So as I was just mentioned before, just transition and the social dimensions are a key feature within this standard. So there is a dedicated disclosure on just transition metrics, but just transition is also included in others disclosures within this standard, where organization will be required to report any impacts associated with their transition and adaptation strategies, but also in association with the use of instruments like GHG removals and carbon credits. And therefore, organization will be required to report any impacts associated with those strategies and those instruments on people, namely workers, local community, indigenous people. And we were urged by the technical committee to develop detailed content on this topic. But of course, the standard will cover other new topics like transition plan, adaptation strategies. The disclosure on adaptation is built on the content of GRI 201 standard disclosure number 2 that was part of the revision of the scope of the revision of this project. Then there is, of course, the topic on reduction targets as primary and urgent objective for any organization. And the content is built and expanded on the content of GRI 305 disclosure number 5. And then, as I just mentioned, there are content and disclosure on greenhouse gas removals and carbon credits with the specific aim to increase transparency around the use of those instruments in the landscape. And then, of course, the revision of emissions disclosures. Moving to the energy standard. The standard covers 5 disclosures. The content didn't change too much from the existing GRI energy standard. The content was revised and updated to align with the latest authoritative sources on the field. It was discussed and agreed on the importance and necessity to have a standalone energy standard, as in a decarbonized world, more and more transparency on energy consumption were considered relevant and necessary. And also because from an impact perspective, of course, the impacts might differ from energy consumption and the purely GHG emissions related or transition strategies related impacts. So the content of GRI energy standard covers the one management disclosure that is new, and then revised content on energy consumption within the organization and in the value chain, and on energy intensity and reduction on energy consumption. This is the proposed effective date for these 2 standards from the standard division. That is the 1st January 2027. And these are the implications for the other standards. So as I explained, the disclosures on greenhouse gas emissions included in GRI 305 emission standards and the content of GRI 201 standard disclosure number 2 are now revised and updated and expanded into the new GRI 102 climate change standard. And the content, sorry, of GRI 302 energy standards are revised and expanded in the new GRI 103 energy standard. So this is the overview that I wanted to share with you. And before pass it over to you, Carol, I will just ask if the GSSB sponsors for this project would like to add anything. We have Anna virtually and Galia in the room.
Yeah, that was going to be my question,
sorry.
actually, my next question. Yes, so just for everybody's benefit, because we have some new members here, we have GSSB observers to the technical working groups and the process that the standards division undertake in developing the standards work. And so this is an important part of our oversight. And so I'd like to ask Galia and Anna for their view on whether this process has been thorough. And so if Galia, if you could start, thank you.
So first I wanted to thank Margarita, Harold, and the whole team, because the output of the standard, of the both standards is great. I'm talking on behalf of the reporting organizations, because my organization, Cocoa Hellenic, is reporting for more than a decade on climate change. And when I was reading the standard, first, it is comprehensive with all the 10 disclosures. Second is pragmatic. There is no confusion. You have a very clear guidance. And I like particularly 4 things in this. The first, it was mentioned several times, the just transition, this unique request to disclose impact on people. And it is not only in the specific disclosure, but it is across the full document to consider how people could be positively or negatively impacted, even from risk perspective. The second is that the standard is having interconnection with biodiversity. So it is very rarely considered that if you improve something, you could negatively impact biodiversity and vice versa. The third thing that I like the most is also practical examples given for positive or negative impact. So not just the theory, the definitions, but real practical examples. For example, carbon removal projects that could have very positive impact on the company with removing some emissions, could have negative impact on human rights or on the local community. And there are given like examples. So the organizations can learn and to consider this and trigger some thinking. The fourth thing that I like is at the end, it is said that the organization should consider how the culture should be changed, including leadership and training, in order to transition to climate change and greener economy. So these are the things from a practical experience that I like the most. The due protocol was fully met, and the standards were finished in the timely manner as we expected based on the timing agreed with the GSSB. Also, I specifically like the way that all the public comments were integrated within the standard, and the rational document is also public, so everybody can read what is the rationale to include or not to include specific comments coming from different organizations that participated in the process. So again, thank you to the team. I like the standard award.
Thank you very much. That's an excellent report on the team's work and the process. And thank you, Galia, for being involved in that and having that oversight. Anna, what would you like to say about the process?
Yes, hi everyone. I would echo what Galia said and extend huge thanks to the project team and the technical experts who participated in this project. We can probably all confirm that this is one of the faster moving fields, and keeping our standards up to date is extremely important, and we operate in an environment where we see that there are ongoing developments and existing standards. So being able to create something like this in alignment with other standard setters, like the GHG protocol, like the other players that Margarita showed on her screen, is very important. I do want to acknowledge that myself as a reporter, similar to Galia, the new standard set a high bar for transparency, but I do believe that that is what is needed for us to collectively help the climate change transition to the low carbon economy. I deeply appreciated the significant improvements in the technical aspects of the standards. I believe that it will bring more comparability and consistency in how organizations report on their environmental impacts connected to climate change, and also importantly on their energy usage as well. I think in this new standards, there's a very important step that we're taking in going beyond simply reporting on the amount of the GHG emissions and being focused on a historical performance to how do the organizations view their role in the transition to low carbon economy. So focus on the transition planning, disclosure around that, how it's reflected in other standards that we see, and now in possibly new GRI standards is quite important. And a link to what this means to our society and to people. So this is not a topic isolated to a simply scientific fact that climate change is taking place, but what is the impact on human lives around it as well. So all that I think is very well covered in the new standards. And I think my very last point is that as I was reading through the final draft version of the standards, is there are disclosures and there are the required points to cover, of course, but the richness of the guidance, and I think echoing what Galia said, the examples, the ways that one that can present the data, I view to be as extremely helpful in all of us processing the standards and being able to reflect that in our own reporting as well. So I think great job to the team, and it was a great pleasure to participate in it as a sponsor. That's
Thank
all
you.
for me, Carol.
Thank you very much, Anna. And the time of the GSSB observers, adding on to the time of the GSSB meetings is really appreciated and a really important part of the process. Thank you. And I think the team can be very proud of those responses there from the GSSB observers, and also the technical working group members, who are experts in their own right and who have given their time to help us developing this standard. So thanks to everybody. Now, there are a couple of matters to consider before we go to the proposals. So we have had a couple of comments raised that the Standards Division will respond to. And there is another question raised about the title of GRI 102, which has always been climate change along the way and has been presented here as climate change and just transition. And we have heard arguments about the importance of the just transition component, which I think we are all well in agreement with. I mean, that's why we are here. That's what we stand for. And there are also arguments, there are other elements in this standard and other impacts beyond the just transition, which are also important, which are also a standout of this standard, which make it different and add to the complementarity of using GRI 102 with IFRS S2. And so, you know, other arguments have been around the central purpose being climate change, and that is what is currently resonating with regulators and standard setters as the sort of headline topic. Does anybody else have any further comments on the title before we move to a vote on the title? I think is probably the appropriate thing to do at this stage in our proceedings. Okay, and I think we'll have to ask for a show of hands here. If anybody wants to correct me on due process anytime, please do so. Otherwise, I'll just carry on in the way that seems to be appropriate. Igazuma?
Thank you, Carol. I just wanted to make one comment about that, probably before we do the vote. In Africa, jurisdiction particularly, I believe that we'll hugely benefit from the emphasis, or how we have amplified just transition, the impacts of climate change on people, very important. Jobs, I mean, we really do not have any local or regional regulatory frameworks around green jobs and things like that. So I wanted to underscore human rights issues. I mean, how eco-anxiety affects people in Africa, and people still trying to understand what Africa is, and especially the untapped potential of things like carbon removal assets and biodiversity on Africa. So I wanted to just highlight to the technical committee that this is well appreciated in some jurisdictions. But I think this vote is also important because we want to think about, other regions, regulators, just every jurisdiction, how it resonates with them. And I wanted to highlight that it's a good thing for GRI to be a first mover in amplifying labor issues in climate change, but we also have to take a holistic approach to it, and that's what I wanted to add.
Anybody want to add anything else? Susanna?
Susanna Muscat, I'm thinking if the objective of this project was to align disclosures with the internationally agreed best practice, I'm thinking about the evolution of the Conference of the Parties documents, where we see progressively, and especially in the last meetings in Baku and Dubai, that just transition is getting, it's recognized as an overarching method to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement. So I would have this in mind. Yeah.
Thank you, and hence it's included in the standard. Okay, anything else? Okay, let's do this then. All those in favor of retaining the working title that we have been working on as climate change. Just the climate change. So the 102, all those in favor of having that title as we've been working towards all these years, months, as climate change. Okay, all those wanting to have it named climate change and just transition. Okay, so I think that's an overwhelming majority wanting to keep the title of GRI 102 as climate change. So any approval, and we haven't got there yet, will be subject to changing it back to climate change. Now, the Standards Division have received some additional comments. Would you like to just outline those and respond to those?
Okay, so thank you, Carol. So we received a comment on the consolidation approach and the acknowledgement of the start of the revision work, if I'm not mistaken, Tomo, that the greenhouse gas protocol is undergoing. So just for saying But of course, we've been discussing the item. We also received feedback in the public consultation, as you could see in the basis for conclusion. But basically, the decision or the suggestion of the technical committee is to align to the current published greenhouse gas protocol standards, because we couldn't do otherwise. And then, of course, if there will be a decision in the authority sources, in this case, the greenhouse gas protocol, to change the approach, then this will inform the next revision of this standard, and this will be applicable to any other items. Then on a question on greenhouse gas removal scope 3 to be reported as a recommendation. So basically, during the exposure draft, there was in the exposure draft, there was a requirement to report both scope 1 and scope 3 removals, but according with feedback that we received throughout the public consultation, and also due to the fact that there is no global agreement on how to account on scope 3 removals, it was decided to suggest to bring them as a recommendation. So it's still possible to report them, but it's not required. So hence they were moved in the guidance. And then we received few comments and feedback on the just transition. So there were few, so I'll try just to maybe give a background on how we worked and how we developed this finalized content. So first of all, we had many conversations with the ILO representatives, but most importantly, the just transition is featured into this standard, but the lead on the content stays within the labor-related standards within GRI. So any decision that was taken informed by the technical committee was also in consideration of the current revision of the labor standards. So some of the feedback were asking why training, for example, or redeployment are only required for employees, because this is in alignment with the current drafts of the labor revision. And then, as said before, for the authoritative sources, if the direction will change in the due course, then this will inform the next revision. We had in conversation with the ILO, and we reference ILO, we use them as authoritative sources in the field. So this gives us confidence that we are, I mean, in the right direction of, I will dare to say, alignment. I don't know if I can say it. So it's grounded in solid work and solid sources. I don't know if there is anything more detailed that we should be commenting or discussing on this, if that's enough.
Okay. Can I ask those who raised those comments whether they are satisfied with those responses, or whether they have further queries, suggested amendments?
Susanna Muscat. I wanted also to ask about when we talk about just transition and the alignment with the labor standards, we have a consultation, engagement with stakeholders element in under the disclosures on transition plan and adaptation plan. Given that the workforce adjustments would be part of consultation work with workers' representative, wouldn't it be good alignment with the labor standards if we have the consultation with workers' representatives specifically mentioned in disclosure 1021G and 1022B.6?
Thank you, Susanna. We had that conversation. I don't want to say something incorrect, but I think we also might have a working draft that included that. But then the decision was to propose not to make a specific reference, because this is included in the GRI glossary definition of stakeholder. That states that our stakeholders mean individuals or group that has interests and that is affected or could affect by the organization activities. We also had some conversation with the dedicated GRI labor team and the experts, and also we had a conversation with the advisory group and the technical committee of the labor project, GRI revision project, and this was the suggestion that we ultimately got from from those consultations and works, but we're happy to maybe sit aside and discuss further with you if that will be a good way forward. And see.
Yeah. I'd actually really like at this point to thank the two Labour representatives for their input here. Only started in January on the GSSB, and you've been fully engaged in this, and it is really important to have that engagement to make sure that this standard and all our standards fully reflect the impact of organizations and the various things that they do, whether responding to climate change or directly, to have that reflected, the impact on workers reflected in the standards. So thank you very much for your thorough engagement at this late stage in the standards life, since you started on the GSSB in January. And now if we could move then, I think we are ready to move to the approval process. And the first step then, are we ready? I'll come back to that. Bastian, as Chief Standards Officer, is it your view as to whether the due process has been followed and met in the development of the GRI 102 climate change standard and the GRI 103 energy standard?
So I can confirm that the topic standards have moved to the due process steps, the project identification and prioritization, project commencement, the appointment of a technical committee, in this particular case, development of proposed standard, the public exposure, importantly, the consideration of respondents' comments on exposure, and then also the interaction with the GI board, supervisory board, and the stakeholder council as per the process. And from the standards division perspective, I can confirm that due process has been followed for all the steps included in the due process protocol.
Thank you. So can I now ask GSSB members to vote as to whether they agree that these standards should be approved, subject to the change back of the name to GRI 102 to being GRI 102 climate change, and that both standards be approved with an effective date of the 1st of January 2027. Gillian, you are going to go around the GSSB members to seek that approval now. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. I'll call each member. If you can please press your microphone so it's on record that you've said yes. Thank you. Anna Nefedova.
I approve.
Thank you. And Lindsay.
I approve.
Thank you. Carol Adams.
I approve.
Charles Chu.
I approve.
Chalandra de Silva.
I approve.
Felipe Martinez Rodriguez.
I approve.
Galia Tisankova.
I approve.
Julia Genuadi. I think Julia might have dropped out. We'll come back to her. Igazuma Okoroba.
I approve.
Jeff Robertson.
I approve.
Rebecca Coriat.
I approve.
Tomu Machiba.
I approve.
Yandong.
I approve.
And Susanna Muscat-Gorska.
I approve.
Thank you all.
Bastian, are there any significant changes between the exposure draft and the final approved standard that require re-exposure?
As we've signaled in the discussion of the public consultation feedback and how we've addressed it in conversation with the technical committee, we see no significant changes that would require re-exposure at this time.
Thank you. And I'm now required again to ask GSSB members to vote that they agree these standards should be issued as final with the change of name of GRI 102 to back to climate change and without re-exposure. Over to you again, Gillian.
Thank you, Carol. Anna Nefedova
Yes.
and Lindsay.
Yes.
Thank you. Carol Adams,
Yes.
Charles Chu,
Yes.
Chalandra de Silva,
Yes.
Felipe Martinez Rodriguez,
Yes.
Galia Tisankova,
Yes.
Ikazuma Okuroba,
Yes.
Jeff Robertson,
Yes.
Rebecca Coriat,
Yes.
Tomu Majiba,
Yes.
Yandong,
Yes.
and Susanna Muscat-Gorska.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, can I ask GSSB members to vote if they agree to withdraw GRI 302 Energy 2016, GRI 305 Emissions 2016, Disclosures 3051 to 3055, and GRI 201 Economic Performance 2016, Disclosure 2012 by 31st of December 2026.
And I'll call out the names again. Anna Nefedova,
Yes.
Anne Lindsay,
Yes.
Carol Adams,
Yes.
Charles Chu,
Yes.
Chalandra de Silva,
Yes.
Felipe Martinez Rodriguez,
Yes.
Galia Tisankova,
Yes.
Ikazuma Okuroba,
Yes.
Jeff Robertson,
Yes.
Rebecca Coriat,
Yes.
Tomu Machiba,
Yes.
Yang Dong,
Yes.
and Susanna Muscat-Gorska.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Gillian. Thank you to you all, and thank you to the technical teams and the technical working group. Pass back to the standards division now.
Thank you so much, Carol and GSSB members. Just to give you a final word on what will happen next. So, as I mentioned before, the next step will be getting the approval also of the due process oversight committee that is scheduled for early April. And provided we also get the approval there, then we will move forward with a rollout and implementation program, capacity building activities, starting from launching the standard. Will be present at climate events across the year, London and New York Climate Weeks, and Climate COP later in the year. And then, of course, we'll be putting together a pilot with early adopters to start testing the disclosures before the effective date, training, interoperability materials, translations in 10 languages, and any other resources that will be collecting feedback that will be helping reporters in the journey of reporting according to these new standards. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And of course, we will be promoting and highlighting all of those disclosures which are distinct about GRI 102 and GRI 103 and particularly and in including the just transition disclosures and those on the implications of transition and adaptation plans for people, communities, and the environment. Thank you all.